Now that the year 2014 is behind us, I thought I'd just make a ranking of my 3 favorite games of the year as well as the 3 worst ones. Naturally, I can only include games here that I actually played, and I certainly didn't play all games that came out since I have, limited time and limited money and limited consoles and well, no, not alive, but other equally as nerdy hobbies. To make this clarification though, when I say games of this year, that only includes games that actually had a release in 2014 and not older ones that I happened to play this year. So without further ado, let's take it from my third favorite. Oh, Street Fighter. Can't live with it, can't live without it. Was the launch of the new Ultra update an absolute disaster? Oh, you better believe it. I mean, all it needs is to take one look at the horribly disjointed and unstable hitboxes of Poison or Elena and you can already tell how goddamn rushed this whole product was. Though I have to admit it was kinda hilarious how for a solid 2 months after release, the daily Street Fighter headline on Event Scrubs was that people found yet another glitch or bug. And let's not forget the netcode on PC. I mean, really? Really, Capcom actually managed to fuck up online play so hard that after transitioning from Games for Windows Live to Steamworks, people wanted back Games for Windows Live. Savor that thought for a moment. Anyway, this might sound very critical now, and it is meant to be, but the unshakable truth remains that this game is the only competitive game of the last years that still motivates me enough to boot it up every day with the intention of getting better at it. And I would say a multiplayer game that manages something like that has to have something going for it. Regardless of me bitching about its shortcomings, at its core Street Fighter 4 is and always has been an immensely enjoyable competitive experience, and the update to Ultra has changed nothing about that. Hell, given that the latest patch straightened out most hitbox issues and even brought in some well thought out balance changes, I'd say it's even better now than it already was. This is, without a doubt, the game I put the most hours into this year, and until the release of Street Fighter 5, I'm probably not going to stop. And that's why I'm placing it among my best games of 2014. Moving on. Hey my fellow Telltale employees, Season 1 of all the Walking Dead games was such a success. How about we release the same game again, but this time we take out all the relatable elements? Well, I can only imagine at that point no one in the creative meeting raised their hand to say, actually sir, that's a bad idea and we shouldn't do that, because thus The Walking Dead Season 2 was born. You'd think after ranting about it for like 14 minutes in my dedicated review of this game I would have calmed down, but no, I'm actually still angry about what they did. I mean, on paper it has all the elements it needs. There's zombies, there's a struggle for survival, there's human conflict. I was under the impression these stories would write themselves from there, but evidently not, because what was a gripping character drama in Season 1 felt completely empty and forced in Season 2. Somewhere the emotional connection between the game and me as the player got lost. Was it the fact that most characters were unlikable assholes and completely incapable of cooperation? Was it the fact that even the characters with potential got eliminated eventually, and not for rational or coherent reasons, but simply because the script needed them gone? Or was it the fact that this time an 11-year-old girl had to take on the designated role of this character gets shit done? Well, how about we take all of these, but maybe the biggest misstep was that Telltale once again implemented only artificial choices that do not give you any impact on how the story progresses. In Season 1 it was too novel to get bothered by it, but now that I've played a few more of these games, it just comes off as increasingly lazy how choices I make are undone by later events that I have no control over, simply because the script leaves no room for contingency. And you know what? This game still has its shining moments, and it's not even that bad. No, The Walking Dead Season 2 doesn't place as my third worst game of the year simply because it's terrible. It is on this list because to me it represents a dead end for Telltale's interactive movies. When you keep creating games that revolve around nothing but making hard decisions, and ultimately all decisions you can make are pointless, then the game itself is pointless. You can try to hide it behind decent writing, but with every new game it becomes a little bit more obvious and less appealing to the player. And when you then also manage to fuck up the writing, like Telltale did in Season 2, well, then you're just digging your own grave at that point. And that is why I firmly believe that they have to change eventually. Moving on. Good for you, Supergiant Games, you are now 2 for 2. I fucking loved Bastion and I love Transistor even more. And really on a surface level you could be forgiven for thinking that these two are pretty much the same game. Isometric viewpoints, stylized graphics, almost Diablo-like combat and a voice-over narration by the god that is Logan Cunningham. But the surface can be deceptive. In fact, if I had to describe Transistor in one word, it would be ambitious, because when you go into the details it tries to be so much more than Bastion in almost every area. Of course, having ambitions, i.e. trying to accomplish a lot at the same time, does not automatically mean that you're succeeding. No, there are features here that work and others that, well, at least need a few tries to grow on you. So there's a lot of light here, but also some darkness. It's great how much variety there is in combat abilities, and it's great how well the game motivates you with a clever unlocking mechanic to try out as many loadouts as you can. On the other hand, there aren't that many meaty combat scenarios to capitalize on this variety, and the game is just very short, so that you can barely go through all abilities before the end, let alone pick and develop any favored playstyles. It's great how, very much like in Souls games, they build this fascinating city and try to tell a story within it in this minimalistic way that requires the player to pay attention to small details to fill in the blanks. Unfortunately, the fact that every character, even the two main characters, are insiders to the world, while you as a player are an outsider with no extra source of information to answer your questions, makes this game fairly inaccessible and somewhat convoluted, especially on the first playthrough. Of course, those are the features that don't work out as well, despite the obvious amount of detail and care put into them. In other areas, however, Transistor fucking excels. The visuals are gorgeous, the narration done by Logan Cunningham is once again absolutely phenomenal, and the soundtrack, oh my god, the soundtrack. This is by far the best soundtrack of 2014. Yes, it's better than Smash 4, yes, it's better than Destiny, what the fuck, how did that win an award? Anyway, this isn't only good music that accompanies the game, the soundtrack itself is woven into the narrative, and it enriches it to the point where only when you understand the story context of each song, you will understand the full meaning behind it. And this isn't where it ends, no, this is the one soundtrack in a long while, hell, the one bit of music in a long while to have such an unbridled and powerful emotional impact on me, up to the point where I found myself just putting this music on, leaning back, closing my eyes and letting the whole experience just wash over me. Really, I'm not trying to sound edgy here, but it's very rare for music to engage me on an emotional level, and yet the songs in Transistor manage this feat with excellence while also being brilliant from a technical standpoint, and personally I find this an amazing accomplishment. So yes, despite some ideas not working out as well as others, despite a mixture of strengths and weaknesses, Transistor is probably one of the most ambitious works in modern indie gaming history, and definitely one of the best games of 2014. Give it a try. Moving on. Get ready everyone, let's play a game. You have 5 seconds to come up with a gameplay premise that sounds more awesome than fast-paced first-person shooter with magic instead of guns. Go! Time's up. That's what I thought. Really, from the get-go, Lich the Battle Mage doesn't sound like a bad game at all. I mean, we can all agree that battling an undead army by raining fire from the sky in first-person perspective sounds like at least a mildly entertaining endeavor, right? So then why is this game so utterly boring? Every single design decision that isn't the game premise itself just shows a complete lack of innovation and exciting ideas. It feels like no one was willing to put even the slightest amount of effort into it, so everything was handled in the most bland and cookie-cutter way possible. Need to design a level? Just put together a bunch of linear corridors. Need to create combat? Just take the same 3 enemy types per level and throw them at the player every 10 seconds. And for the boss fights, some giant monster that eats fireballs for half an hour. Can we wrap this up now? And the fucking writing, oh my god, is this a joke? I haven't heard dialogue this shitty since, well, okay, not so long ago actually, and shortly before that too, but honestly just watch the intro cinematic to this game on YouTube and you'll see what I mean. Need a motivation to get the main character on a revenge journey? I know, let the antagonist visit his shop and then, level-headed as Saturday morning cartoon villains usually are, literally kill his wife because he can't sell him some random sword. What? I swear you can't make this shit up. I guess this really is the theme of the game. No effort. It doesn't feel like the devs of Lich the Battle Mage created a video game. It feels more like they were cynically working off a checklist to meet the minimum requirements to even be allowed to classify this shit as a game and sell it as one. And that is not to say that Lich the Battle Mage is particularly unplayable or unpolished, no. The basic premise that I so praised earlier is still inside a functioning game here, but the enthralling act of imprisoning a group of skeletons in ice and then shattering them with a fire blast gets very old very fast when this is what you're supposed to be doing for the entirety of the game's runtime. And it gets even more obnoxious when the game almost hits you over the head with how aggressively bland and uninteresting it is. I call Transistor one of the most ambitious games of the last years. I am pretty confident in calling Lich the Battle Mage one of the least ambitious games of the last years. Stay away from this crap. Moving on. To anyone who follows my channel, this probably won't be coming as too much of a surprise, given that my initial review of Divinity Original Sin wasn't as much a review as it was me drooling over the game for 10 minutes straight. To be fair, I was struggling a bit on whether I wanted to give my game of the year to Transistor or Divinity, but then I realized I don't have to make excuses. Divinity Original Sin is just the better game, if that makes any sense. With this I don't have to talk about story or themes or artistic visuals. What I'm receiving is untamed and well-designed gameplay in its purest form. And everything else is just so much icing. Nice to have, but inconsequential in comparison. Divinity Original Sin combines addictive itemization and character building with turn-based RPG combat that isn't only tactical, but it also lets you utilize a complex and highly organic set of environmental interactions, and by this, it makes sure that not a single fight plays out the same. What's more is that it actually requires you to think. Not only during combat or the increasingly meaty puzzle segments, no, it acknowledges that players don't necessarily need shiny markers that tell them where they have to go next. Yes, it embraces that some people are actually capable of deducing directions from dialogue. It applauds you when you set out to explore and find progress at your own accord. In short, it doesn't hold your hand. But I don't only admire Divinity Original Sin simply because it's a good game. There's more to it than that. It's a classic Western RPG in a time of third-person action. It's a Kickstarter game in a time where many thought those would be a hopeless concept. It's a PC exclusive in a time of consoleization, and it's unapologetically complex in a time of casualization. And despite all of this, Divinity Original Sin managed to be both a financial as well as a critical success. Larian Studios, you did very well. Game of the Year. Moving on. When a new entry into one of the most critically acclaimed PC gaming franchises of all time is released and at the end of the year no one remembers, or at least would rather forget that it even existed, you know something went horribly wrong. But I won't allow it, no, I will make you remember what Eidos Montreal and Square Enix did. This crime may not be forgotten. And you know, I'm not even a hardcore Day One Thief fan. The first time I played the original games was at the end of 2013, ironically in preparation for the new Thief. But when I did that, something weird happened. After just the first 2 hours of playing it, I was immediately able to understand why these games are considered masterpieces of stealth gaming and loved by so many. The level structure, the exploration, the goddamn atmosphere, it just became very clear to me very quickly how well designed it all was, and playing Thief 1 and 2 was an absolute blast. And then we got this. I guess on some level I shouldn't even be that surprised. Thief 2014 is certainly not the first failed reboot of a beloved franchise for modern audiences, but the efficiency with which they ruined almost everything that made the first games fun and unique is truly legendary. Gone are the giant explorable levels, gone is the sarcastic black humor, gone are the mission objectives that actually fucking required you to steal shit in a game about a thief, and apparently even a freely usable jump command is nowadays an affront to the modern gamer. Or is there any other explanation why my feet aren't even allowed to leave the ground unless it's part of a contextual button prompt or a set piece? Climbing a roof when we don't want you to, in a game where you're supposed to avoid open streets, so surely you jest. Now this alone makes Thief 2014 a bad and unwanted Thief game, and I could leave it at that, but unfortunately that's not all. No, the amount of downright amateurism that went into this game is actually physically staggering. The AI is buggy as all hell, the game has sound glitches up the ass, and some of the features are so poorly designed that it's just laughable. I mean, look at this mess of a map screen. What is this? Is this supposed to convey information about 3 vertical levels all on a single screen? Did no one look at this and say,
I may have gone too far in a few places?
And on top of it all, of course, the PC version is once again completely unoptimized and barely playable. And so what was merely a bad video game becomes one of the most excruciating experiences I ever went through, and the worst game of 2014. Rot in hell, you disgusting piece of software. Happy New Year, everyone.